I am. Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Quentin Harrell, and on behalf of the Minority Business Alliance Executive Committee, our Vice Chair Extraordinaire, Kay Monroe, our most treasured treasurer, Alex Erpy, and our lovely, long-lasting, long-standing chamber liaison, Andrea Copeland. We thank you all for joining us, and we welcome you to another critically important conversation for the minority business community and the community at large. I'm very excited about our grounded yet high caliber presenter of today's subject matter. And we sincerely hope you all find value in it like we feel like you will, as we feel like we will. The work we do for the Minority Business Alliance is guided by a clear vision of a region of thriving minority business owners and professionals. Our mission statement is to convene, support, and promote minority business professionals, leveraging local business and nonprofit partners to expand community wealth building. We have 4 simple goals, which are our value propositions to members that make their investment worthwhile. Professional development and training is one, like Toastmasters or SWAM certification training that's coming up. Dynamic educational sessions, like cash forward and financial analysis, investing, and today's presentation being one. Networking and resource connections, our socials and connecting members to our partners, and competitive funding opportunities, like grant making with our partnership with United Way, our own Minority Business Alliance Endurance Fund. So these are the 4 goals that we simply pursue. And our primary objective as an executive committee for this organization is to create more value for our members. That's our sole goal. We're a member-driven organization, and membership fees are the lifeblood of our organization. So we encourage you to join the MBA or tell a friend about MBA. With our partnership with the Chamber, we provide a very manageable discounted rate of $240 per year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea. But for that $240 per year, that's for minority businesses and organizations. As a member of MBA, you're automatically a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Shout out to Elizabeth and the Chamber staff. So for more information about MBA, check us out on Facebook or cvillechamber.com/MBA, excuse me. So for today's agenda, we have a few announcements that we want to share with you all, our presentation from our illustrious guests, and hopefully a rich Q&A discussion. And based on the attendees, I looked at the list this morning. I'm seeing the people that are coming in right now, the mental capital in the room, as well as our guests. I truly believe that we're going to have a rich Q&A conversation about this subject matter. So without further ado, I'll defer to my good man, Alex Erpy, so that he can give us our first announcement.
Good afternoon, everyone. Same here. I'm with Quentin. I'm very excited about both today's wonderful presenter that we have, as well as Quentin said, some great human capital that we have here that I think we have a fantastic conversation afterwards. Quick announcement here. We always like to provide value in terms of news to our membership in ways that particularly minority businesses in our community can have access to procurement opportunities. So there is coming up our local Central Virginia Small Business Development Center, that's CVSBDC, which is hosted by CIC, is co-hosting an event with the Virginia Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity about how to conduct business and generate leads as a minority business with EVA, which is the state procurement registration website, which has seen some updates in recent years. The event is a free webinar. It's going to take place on March 30th from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the direct registration link into the chat. So you can literally click that, sign up for the webinar. You can also contact Shira at CVSBDC. She's one of the coordinators there to just get in touch, ask some questions, If you have questions on EVA, if you have some questions on SWAM certification, you can always get in touch with people at CVS BDC who can help you with some one-on-one consultation to help your minority business get registered, get SWAM certified as a small women or minority-owned business, so that you can do business in that category with state agencies as well as the state itself. So I'm going to put both the direct registration link as well as some contact info for CVS BDC into the chat. And I definitely would encourage you all, if you are available on March 30th, to be sure to check out that webinar and just get more familiar, if you're not already, with the state procurement and the ways to generate leads as a minority business. And so that's what I have, Quentin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. Very important information to the minority business community. Get SWAM certified, please. Next, we would love to introduce one of our community partners. I want to give the next few people 1 minute to just introduce themselves and the other information that we want to share with the group today. But right now, Ayani Wynn Floyd. Ayani, I think I got your name right today. The last time I called your name, I chopped it up and butchered it. So Ayani, please introduce yourself to the community.
Thank you. Yes, you got my name right. And I would like to say good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayani Wynn-Floyd, and I'm with the Office of Economic Development for the City of Charlottesville. And I'd like to announce that we will be having a BRACE grant for businesses within the city, and that stands for Building Resiliency Amongst Charlottesville Entrepreneurs. This program is a matching reimbursable grant of up to $2,500, which will help local business owners within the city limits. This business is required to provide a 30% matching contribution fund. And if you have any questions or any concerns about the BRACE grant, you can feel free to contact myself or George Sandridge, who can also raise his hand up. He's also within this Zoom call, and I will provide information in the chat as well.
Thank you,
Applications, thank you. Applications close March 25th.
Okay. Thank you so very much. I'm glad you're here. Glad you're in the community, making things happen. Next, we want to give the mic to our Vice Chair Extraordinaire, Kay Monroe. She has a very exciting announcement for you all as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to see you in the room. We are very excited for today's presenter and information that will be provided. And I'm equally excited to share with you a save the date message. On Friday, September 9th, from 6:30 p.m. until 11 p.m., we will celebrate our 10-year anniversary as the Minority Business Alliance. We are so happy for our wonderful family of sponsors, the community of stakeholders that have been with us, and then of course, all of the wonderful accomplishments that this community has been able to partake in and engage in over the 10 years. It is a formal event. It will be held at the club at Glenmore on 250 East. We will have more ticketing information. I would be certain by the next meeting or so you all can begin to plan to attend this very illustrious event and opportunity. If there's anyone in the room who is interested in participating as a sponsoring partner, please reach out to any of us, Andrea, Q, or Alex, or myself, and we can provide other information. For those of you all who have already decided to sponsor us, we are grateful for your continued patronage and support of our mission. I look forward to seeing everyone in this room in that room. So I hope that you will join us. Thanks so much. Q, back to you.
Thank you, Kay. Appreciate it. 10 years is unbelievable. And it's fantastic because I see a couple of the people, if not more than a couple, that were actually a part of the organization at its inception. So good to see some of those people in attendance as well. Andrea is going to share with you all about our next meeting.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Our next meeting will be in May 24th at CCC. We are ditching the Zoom meetings. We're ditching the in-person meetings. We just want to have some fun. So it's our second annual MBA Fun Day. We moved it up a couple of months because those of you who joined us last summer in July, yeah, we were baked and burnt out there at Jefferson School. So we want to just bring it a little closer and a little cooler. We'll be surrounded by shade out there and just having some fun. We will do some team building exercises as well as low challenges. We won't be climbing the high challenges this time around. So come out and join us. Just give yourself some time away from the office and Zoom and everything. The kids will still be in school. So come and join us, and registration will open soon for that. And it's in partnership with the Business Women's Roundtable. So we are collaborating with them. So come and join us.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That's perfect timing. It's 12:15, and we want to set the stage for our guests. So this is perfect timing on our introductions. First, I'd like to thank good brother Mark Cartwright, who's here on the Zoom call as well. That he is UVA's new director of supplier diversity, and I really want to thank him for the quick connection to Dr. Fred and Dr. Fred's willingness to join us in such quick fashion. It was fantastic, and it's just one of those examples of the network doing what the network can do, and partnerships and relationships. So as you all may know, Dr. Fred has a BA in economics from UCLA and a PhD in economics from Yale. So it's safe to say he has some expertise. But I said to myself before we talked that this brother sounds like Yale, and no shade to Yale, but if he sounds like Yale, we got to go with somebody else. But after sitting down talking with them, this information is important, and just to hear him speak in such a grounded manner, laid back, down to earth cat. Pardon me if you don't like me calling you a cat, but you're one cool cat, in my opinion. Needless to say, I was super excited. And so with his range that's needed to communicate to the experts as well as to the layman like myself, I'm excited to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Fred McKinney. Dr. McKinney, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right. First of all, thank you, Q, for that introduction. I appreciate it. I am not from Yale. I'm from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, the son of some cotton pickers down there. So I do feel quite at home in Virginia. My wife is from Virginia. In fact, she's from a little town called Madison Heights outside of Lynchburg. And I also want to say hello to Mark Cartwright. He's a very good friend, somebody I've known for a number of years. He does great work. And you guys are very fortunate to have him in your community. So today I'm going to be talking about inflation. And I've prepared a presentation. I'm going to go through it. And I'd like for you guys to feel comfortable raising your hand if you have a question. I know we have Q&A at the end, but if there's something that's really pressing, I'm open to having some questions during the presentation, okay? So the topic of my talk today is inflation, MBEs, and BIPOC consumers. I added really the BIPOC consumers component because in many respects, we're all consumers. We wear different hats depending on perhaps where we are, what we're doing, but we are all consumers. And I think that there are some lessons that we can learn from past experiences about how, as a business owner, you can respond to inflationary pressures, but also how, as a consumer, you can respond to inflationary pressures. So that's the overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. I got this was sent to me by one of my cousins, And I just thought it was really timely. Gas so damn high, the mailman working from home, he called me yesterday and read me my bills. I mean, it's getting to be that bad for some folks. And you know, that's what inflation does. It forces you to sort of rethink how you go about doing things. Now, that is actually not such a bad thing if you think about it. Sometimes you need some stress in your life to make some changes in your life, or you have some stress in your life to make some changes in your business, and inflation has that effect. Not that we have to do this, but we're going to talk about some of those reactions and responses to inflation today. So again, as introductions, Q did my introduction, that's fine. I want to talk about some definitional pieces. What is inflation? The meat of the discussion today is going to be really on the distributional impact of inflation on MBEs and the distributional impact of inflation on BIPOC consumers. And then importantly, what do you do about it? So I'm going to spend some time talking about, okay, this is something that seems to be out of our control. And to a certain extent, there are some aspects of inflation that you can't do anything about. It is what it is, but that doesn't mean that you don't have some ability to make some changes in your business or changes in your life that will ease the pain of inflation. So that's what we're going to talk about. And then we'll have some Q&A. So first, what is inflation? It's interesting. I read the Wall Street Journal pretty much every day online. I encourage you to do the same as a business owner. It really is the business Bible. And so one of the things I noticed today in the paper, they had an article with this title, "What is inflation?" And so I said, wow, I could send you guys the Wall Street Journal. We could almost be done with this. But they got it right. I mean, their description of it was essentially what I'm going to be talking about today. It's a general rise in prices. So it's not just that one price is going up, although one price can trigger effects that go into the rest of the economy. But inflation is a general rise in prices. That means everything is going up by and large for the most part. But we have this. It means that the indexes, and I'm going to talk about the indexes. The consumer price index we're probably most familiar with, which is a measure of literally hundreds of products that consumers buy. So you can think of everything from food to gasoline, to used cars, to computers, to other types of goods and services go into the index. And what the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the Department of Labor does on a monthly basis is they just simply track how the prices of those products are changing on a month-to-month basis. And so you probably have seen numbers for the consumer price index has been in the news because in February, the consumer price index went up by 7.9%, the highest rate in decades on a monthly basis for year over year. So that is a measure of the general rise in prices in the index. Now, what economists do is we look very closely at that index, and we know that there are some products and services that have a disproportionate effect on the index, specifically gasoline and food. And so what economists do, and you may hear this term, what is the core rate of inflation? Well, the core rate of inflation is it basically takes out all of the volatile components or the most volatile components of the index. Specifically, it takes out gasoline and it takes out food. So those products, as you all know, have been increasing pretty dramatically for a number of reasons. I'll get into some of those reasons a little later. So the core inflation rate is something that policymakers pay a lot of attention to because, again, from their perspective, food prices and energy prices are in many cases beyond the control of policymakers. So let's look at what else is going on in the economy and not just what's happening in gasoline markets and food markets. So the consumer price index is a measure of the prices of our price changes in consumer products. You also have the producer product index. And so the PPI is an index that, like the consumer price index, except that it measures the goods and services that producers buy. So in the producer price index, you might have things like rubber, or you might have things like steel, or you might have things like materials, rare materials that go into software products or computer chips. And so it's a different, same technology to calculate the index, but a different products. And it's important because we know that, you know, when producers are experiencing increases in their prices, it follows that those increases in prices that producers, companies are facing will also be passed on to consumers perhaps at some point. So in many respects, the producer price index is a leading indicator of the consumer price index. And then there's something called the GDP deflator, which is an index that measures both consumer prices and prices that are called final goods and services. So some of those might be producer prices. It's a broader index, but it's probably one of the lesser known indices. Most people are familiar with the consumer price index, but as a business owner, you need to pay attention to the producer price index, because that's what your peers in business are paying or experiencing for the prices of goods and services that they are buying. So I put together a table, a chart showing what's going on with consumer and producer prices. And you see that in this chart, you know, they talk about, you know, a chart can tell a lot, but you see just on this chart, which begins in 2002, that 2021 and 2022 have been radically different from the past few years in terms of what's going on in the US economy. I'm sorry, 2012 to 2022. So the last 10 years this chart shows. But I think it's important not to blow this out of perspective. Most economists have a very long-term view of things. And so this is, even though it's 10 years, is relatively short term. Here's the experience really for the past 50, 60 years. And so if you look at this chart, while in 2000 and this goes up through 2020, but you see that we've had experiences in the US economy of inflation, consumer price inflation, that has been significantly higher, even though compared to where we are today at 7.9%. You see, going back into 1979, 1980, we had inflation rates of over 12.5%, 13%. And so, you know, that gives you some of the history. So, you know, I think it's important to understand sort of the long-term history of inflation so that you keep calm. You know, we've been through a lot worse than this, and we'll get through this as well. But this chart also, I think, reveals some other very important information that as a business owner, you need to be aware of, because I think here again, we're speaking to what steps or what you can expect or what is reasonable to expect during or after a period of inflation. The gray bars, you see those vertical gray bars in this chart? Those gray bars represent periods of economic recession. So in those gray bars, that's when the US economy went through a downturn in real economic activity. And so if you look, there seems to be some patterns here. If you look at it closely, you see that near the peak of inflation, right after the peak of inflation, you see these gray bars. That is not a coincidence. Okay, so you see that in the late 60s, you actually in the first part of the diagram in the early 60s, you see at the beginning of the diagram, you see that right after that high point, you see a gray bar. Right after the high point in 1969, you see a gray bar again. Right after the high point in 1975, you see a gray bar. In 1980, you see a gray bar. In 1990, you see a gray bar right after the 89 peak. And so what's going on here is a connection between inflation and economic activity that I don't think you can ignore. And you should, as a business owner and as a consumer, think about, okay, if this is the history, what is it that I can do? What can I expect? How will it impact me? What can I do about it? Okay. So we're going to use this chart to talk about, you know, what I expect and many other economists expect to happen as a result of this inflationary period that we're seeing. So in terms of the causes of inflation, there are different causes of inflation. One is that it is a monetary phenomenon. And by that, we mean the Federal Reserve, which is the organization in the US system that's responsible for controlling the supply of money, which they do in a number of ways, but primarily through what are called open market operations, the buying and selling of government securities. That's what the Fed does to control the supply of money. When the Federal Reserve buys government securities, these are debt instruments that are issued by the federal government. When the Federal Reserve buys these government securities, what it does is the Fed, if they buy them, they get the securities, and whoever sells those securities gets cash. That cash is new cash to the US economy. And so that's how the Federal Reserve puts money into the US economy, and for that matter, into the global economy. They buy US government securities. Now, when they buy US government securities, a couple of things happen. You think about basic finance, there's an inverse relationship between the price of an asset or the price of a bond and the interest rate. So when the Federal Reserve is buying government securities, it's putting demand on those government securities. And like any other product or service, when the demand increases, the price goes up. Well, if we're talking about bonds here, then when the price of those bonds goes up, the interest rates on those bonds goes down. And so the yield on those bonds goes down. So the Federal Reserve is not only controlling the supply of money through its buying and selling of government securities, it's also controlling the interest rates on government securities, which have an effect on all interest rates. And so here's where we get these connections between the Federal Reserve policies, interest rates on government securities, and interest rates on things like the prime rate that businesses pay to banks, the mortgage rate that homeowners pay for their mortgages, the credit card rates that borrowers pay for credit cards. All of these interest rates are affected by the Federal Reserve's policy. That's why people are watching what the Fed is doing. But the Federal Reserve can cause inflation by putting too much money into the system. And I give you a good example. Let's say somebody just in your community, and only in your community, came and dropped $100 million in cash out of the sky. Just one day, dropped $100 million in dollar bills out of the sky onto Charlottesville. Well, what would happen? All of a sudden, people would have a lot more cash than they thought they would have at this time, and they'd probably try to spend it. And as they tried to spend it, they would drive up prices of goods and services in that community, because sooner or later, the people who sell stuff will realize that, hey, there's a lot of people out here knocking on my door trying to buy stuff. They would raise prices. That's sort of a very basic analogy of what the Fed is doing when it's putting money into the system. It's funding these activities. But the Fed, in addition to putting money into the economy, they can take money out, or they can slow down the rate of growth in the money supply. That's what the Fed is doing now. So the Federal Reserve, is actively increasing interest rates through its what we call its open market operations, because they don't want this inflation to become rampant. They don't want this inflation to get out of control. And so monetary policy is both the cause and the fix of inflation. But here's the rub. As they are slowing down the economy by taking money out of the economy, again, driving up interest rates, that is putting the economy into this different sort of economic situation where we might be facing a recession. And so that is really one of the lessons, the key lessons that as a business owner, you need to pay attention to. As the Fed, and they announced last week on Wednesday that they raised their target rate by 1/4 point. And not only that, importantly, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, in his comments said that over the next 12 months, they plan on raising rates at least 6 more times. So clearly, the posture of the Federal Reserve has changed. And you might ask, changed from what? Well, if you recall, we were in a pandemic. And in a pandemic, the economy was flat on its back. And so what the Fed did during the pandemic was put money into the system in large amounts of, and so just so that there would be more money so that people could spend, could continue to support the economic activity. Now there's a reversal of this policy. The Fed says, okay, we could do that because our concern during the pandemic was that the economy was going to go into a deeper recession. We prevented that, but now the economy is going into inflation. So we've got to change with this changing environment. So, but inflation, recession, in many respects, is a monetary phenomenon. Now, prices reflect real goods and services. So we're talking about the prices of everything. So we got to look at markets. And the markets that we have to pay close attention to are labor markets, product markets, and raw material and oil markets in particular. And so we know, for instance, that in the labor market, I'm not sure how it is in Charlottesville right now, but in most markets in the US right now, the labor market's pretty tight. The unemployment rate's about under 4%. You probably have heard about the great resignation that's taking place across the country. People are saying, you know, take this job and shove it. They don't want to work anymore. And they're trying to figure out, well, maybe I can live on less. Now, some economists are saying those people are going to be back in the labor market when they realize that they can't pay all their bills like they used to. But because of the pandemic and, you know, just a different way that Americans are working, some people have said, you know what, I don't know if I need to work. And so they've left the labor market. Labor market is very important because if you think about wages and the total of income, it makes up almost 65–70% of total income for the US economy is wage income. And so that market is huge. And if it's tight, wages are going up, which is a good thing that wages are going up. But if wages are going up and the businesses are paying those wages, their bottom lines are affected. And so the response to increases in wages can put pressure on prices. So economists pay very close attention to what's going on in the labor market. In the product markets, you know, here is, again, we're talking about, you know, the goods and services. We see, for example, for cars, used car prices were up almost 40% a year over year. Well, why is that? One of the reasons, again, goes back to the pandemic, and that you had supply chain problems, and those supply chain problems kind of found themselves working through the product markets. Car companies couldn't get the computer chips that run these cars. So the demand for new cars was far exceeding the supply of new cars. So that pushed car buyers into the used car market. And what they found there was that prices of used cars, as more people wanted those used cars, the prices of used cars went up. and you had this inflationary effect on the whole overall market. Raw materials and oil. We always pay close attention to raw materials and oil. You know, and things like nickel have been way up. Oil prices, as you know, have been way up. Partly pandemic, partly war, partly other factors. Here we got into sort of the connection between those external and internal shocks. War has always been a major cause of inflation because during periods of war, the U.S. government typically spends a lot more money than they normally would. And so that can have an inflationary effect simply because of how we pay for that war, but also the effect that the war has on the demand for goods and services. Famines and pandemics and supply chain implications. I mean, we're still in the midst of supply chain issues. And these supply chain issues, again, affect the balance and imbalance between demand and supply. And I have to put in here climate change because climate change affects everything from food prices to housing prices to, where people are actually living these days. And finally, there are psychological causes of inflation. And this, quite frankly, is one of the things that the Federal Reserve is particularly concerned about, because what happens with inflation is if everybody believes that prices are going up, guess what? Prices will go up. Because if you believe prices are going to go up, and say you're a decision maker, well, you want to get ahead of this if you're a business owner. And if you're thinking, well, I'm going to have to pay more for my products that I use in my business, I might as well begin to start raising prices myself. And so it becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So these are the major causes of inflation. And sometimes it's one, most of the times it's multiple causes, and they all kind of work in tandem. Well, what are the solutions? And I talked about the Federal Reserve in the last slide. One of the solutions is, quite frankly, a recession. If you go back to that chart, and I can do that during Q&A if we need to, those recessionary periods were followed by a decline in inflation. And so one way to cure inflation is sort of the pill. You know, the medicine is sometimes the medicine is worse than the disease. But one way to deal with inflation is through higher interest rates caused by the Federal Reserve. Higher interest rates have an impact on just about everybody. They have an impact on mortgages. And so we're even beginning to see mortgage rates increase for the first time in many years. And the 30-year mortgage now rate is over 4% nationally. It's been in the 2s, which made housing very affordable and easy for many consumers to get into their houses. But now as rates go up, that activity is going to stop, and that means that home builders may stop building homes at the same rate because the demand is down, and we're beginning to see that. And so their monetary solution to the inflationary pressures is to raise interest rates, and the Federal Reserve has already stated that's what it's going to do. And so again, you'll see that now you'll see my analysis is not going to be a surprise as to what's going to happen. Fiscal policy restraints, by that we mean what is Congress doing? And so I just saw today that the administration announced that they were going to stop supporting hospitals on their care of uninsured COVID patients. That's fiscal policy. It's healthcare policy, but it's fiscal policy. And so before, if hospitals were able to bill the federal government for a COVID patient's care, it paid the hospital bill. Now the hospital is going to say, well, who's going to pay me for this stuff if the feds aren't? The uninsured person probably can't afford it. And so it's going to have a dampening impact. That's taking money out of the system. That's fiscal policy. So fiscal policy, that's a fiscal policy restraint. You also saw that part of the president's agenda when he got one of his major fiscal policy bills passed, but he didn't get the others passed. The big infrastructure bill was not passed. And so that is restraint. Congress is saying no. And part of the reason Congress is saying no is that I think they are using it, perhaps are using inflation as a pretext for not doing some things. But that's the reality. If they're not going to increase their spending, then it's going to have a dampening effect on prices. But it's also going to put the economy in more of a recessionary footing. Another solution, and I put this solution in air quotes here, is an industrial policy, or what are wage and price controls. We've tried that and they didn't work. And so I'm not a big fan of them, and I don't think you're going to find too many economists who are big fans of wage and price controls, for the primary reason it's too complicated. We don't do a good job at it, and it's almost impossible to do it. I remember when I was working at the White House in 1978 and 79 during the Carter administration on the Council of Economic Advisors, one of the things that we were working on was eliminating wage and price controls that were put into place by the Nixon administration after the Vietnam War. And there was, it just didn't work. There were too many prices to manage, and there was too much cheating going on, and there were too many ways around the government's ability to try to control those prices. But that is a method that you might hear about in coming months if inflation spirals out of control. So let's get now to the distributional impact of inflation on minority businesses and small businesses, I would add. First, it talks about market power. One of the disadvantages of being small is that you might not have a lot of market power. Well, what is market power? Market power manifests itself in your ability to charge the prices that you want to charge. So, you could ask the question, why didn't you raise your prices 2 years ago? The answer to that question is probably because you feared that if you raised your prices, you might lose your consumers. They might go someplace else. So you lacked market power to execute a strategy that could lead to higher profits through higher prices. So most small businesses and most minority businesses don't have real market power in the sense of being able to raise their prices when they want to. So this is important during an inflationary period because your cost, your providers might have, the people you buy from might have market power, and they might be able to raise their prices, and you might not be able to do anything about it. But the question is, can you pass that price, your cost increase, because of what's going on with inflation, can you pass those cost increases on to your consumers, to your customers? And if you can, then you have some market power. If you can't, your profitability is going to be squeezed. And so that's where this becomes really important, is your ability to raise prices during a period of inflation is going to be largely determined by how much power you have in the market. So there's also a heightened competition for products and resources during an inflationary period. And so here again, your pricing strategy is very important. Companies, and I remember seeing this through some previous periods of recession in particular. So there are a lot of companies out in the American economy right now who saw that chart that are familiar with that chart that I showed you, that these periods of rapid inflation are followed by recession. They are beginning to line up their market. They understand that if, recessions are cruel. They don't care. They put companies out of business. That's what recessions do. No entrepreneur wants to be put out of business. So how do you protect yourself from being put out of business by a recession? Is you get more customers. So getting more customers in this environment means more competition, heightened competition. And so what we've seen in previous recessions is some companies who you never had to worry about, they never were in your space, all of a sudden are knocking on your customers' doors because they'll take any customer, including yours. And so as a business person, as an entrepreneur, you need to prepare yourself for this heightened competition and be prepared to go out and get more customers. So you've got to, be aware of this environment is changing. Access to capital. Banks are paying close attention to this right now because they're raising rates for everybody, for borrowers of homes, mortgages, but also business loans. And so banks are very concerned about inflation for a number of reasons. One is if a bank has lent money to a business customer and that loan does not have provisions for increases in the rate that the borrower pays, what inflation does is it makes that loan less valuable because the borrower is going to be paying that loan back with dollars that are not worth as much. So one of the things I said about inflation is a general rise in prices. Another way to look at inflation is it's the general decline in the value of your dollar. And so if inflation is taking place, you're paying your loans back with dollars that are worth less. That's not good for banks. They want the dollars that they're paid back with to be at least as good as the dollars that they lent. And so access to capital is going to be, I think, tougher in this inflationary environment because banks are going to have to raise rates, but they're also going to be concerned about your ability to pay if there is a coming recession. Borrowers versus lenders. As I mentioned with the banks, if you are a borrower and you've got a fixed rate loan, inflation actually is good for you. You're paying back with cheaper dollars. That is, if you got income and your income is keeping up with inflation, you are actually going to be better off. That doesn't mean every borrower is better off. It's borrowers whose income is keeping up or exceeding the rate of inflation. Those borrowers are better off. Lenders who have fixed rate loans out, they're worse off. And so again, because they're being repaid with dollars that are not worth as much. And I put here executive strategic leadership as a distributional effect. You are the leader of your company. Now is the time you got to earn that leadership position. And so you've got to take into account all of these factors that are taking place in the economy. They affect you whether you like it or not. And whatever strategy you had in a pre-inflationary environment may not be the best strategic approach during an inflationary period, and is clearly not going to be the best strategic approach if the economy sinks into a recession. So you've got to be thinking about these factors. The distributional effects on BIPOC consumers, they're similar but different. So one of the things that we're seeing right now, and there's been a lot of discussion in the media about it as well, and we've known this for years. Inflation is terrible if you're on a fixed income. Inflation is horrible if you have no income or your income is declining. Your cost of living has increased, but your revenue, your income hasn't increased. And so labor market participation is something that's why I'm saying this, the Great Resignation may be over. I think as one of the effects of an inflationary period, it may bring back people who decided that they were going to try to survive and thrive without working. I think that they're going to find that that's a much more difficult proposition during an inflationary period. Other sources of income. I grew up at a time when, as a kid, I had to do everything. So you had to hustle. And one of the good things about entrepreneurs is they know how to hustle. And that means that, if you got to consider if you're in a household and you're experiencing these price increases, you got to think about, well, where else can we get income? How else can we generate income? And so other sources of income become very important and can offset the effect of inflation. Neighborhood effects, inflation doesn't affect everybody the same. And so you can imagine, one of the sort of the great ironies of sort of urban and American life is that the poor pay more for everything. And so you've got to be aware of why is that? Why do you pay more? Well, you might not have access to a car. You might not have access to the lowest cost sources of food. You might not have access to the best prices because you're not buying enough of something to get the quantity discount. So you might not have the storage space in your home to go to Costco or some of the box stores to buy in bulk. So all of those mean you pay more. Those are what I'm calling neighborhood effects. And so those are things that you've got to consider. They might be, the solution might be in there. They're not easy solutions, but we're talking about neighborhood effects. The borrowers versus lenders piece is the same that we talked about with businesses. If you're a borrower and you're on a fixed income, then what's going to happen if your prices are rising now, the prices that you're paying are rising as a consumer, then you're going to have less money to service your loans. And so borrowing new money is not going to be something that many consumers are going to be doing during an inflationary period. They don't want to carry this additional burden during a period when everything else is costing them more. So that also affects lenders. So lenders know that. They know that the quality of their loans may decline during an inflationary period, so they might just make fewer loans. I remember the first house that I bought was in 1980 during that spike, and my mortgage rate in 1980 was like 14.5%. Can you imagine what that would do to your mortgage rate today? Not your mortgage rate, but your total mortgage payment today if you had to pay a 14% rate of interest. Well, we did it because that was the market. But as soon as the rates came down, we refinanced, of course, and got out of that kind of rate. But that has a chilling effect on on the housing market. Savers versus users of capital. And if you're on a fixed income, inflation is horrible, because now you basically just have less money to pay for your cost of living. And so this is going to put stress on Americans who are on a fixed income, whether it's from Medicare, Medicaid, or some other pension fund, or just their wage is such that they're not able to get higher wages, or they're not getting an increase in their wages. And so savers are harmed by inflation. And I encourage you to go take a look. One of the images that I think is really makes the point is there's a difference between inflation and hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is something that we have not fortunately experienced in this country, but other countries have experienced hyperinflation. And there's some examples. If you just go to Google and type in hyperinflation, you might see a person putting a wheelbarrow full of cash, pushing it through the market. And what inflation does is it destroys the savings of savers. So savers are harmed by inflation. And unless you have alternatives to putting your money in the bank, you will suffer some decline in your net worth during a period of inflation. So what can you do? Increase productivity. And I know I'm getting close to time, but I'm going to get through this real quick. Increase productivity is where you start. And give you an example. Let's, for example, say you make 100 widgets and it takes 10 hours to make that 100 widgets. Okay, that's 10 widgets an hour. Well, if you can make that 100 widgets in 8 hours instead of 10 hours, then without any price increases or anything else, you have become more productive. So productivity is measured in units. And the trick here is, if you can make more with less, you've increased your productivity. You in effect have increased your prices without increase your prices. So you need to think about, as a business owner, how can I increase my productivity? Now, for some of you, that might mean a very close look at your labor. How much labor do you use? What type of labor do you use? How productive is that labor? Can we do more with less? And so that's the productivity solution for MBEs and small businesses. Buying better. And so as in a period of inflation, you got to shop around. You know, like Smokey Robinson said, my mama told me, you better shop around. And so you got to shop around during a period of inflation. So even though you may like the suppliers that you currently have, during a period of inflation, you've got to shop. You got to buy better. And you might find you use that to negotiate better fees. Yes. So, and then your pricing strategies. You have to be able to raise prices and not be afraid to raise prices, if that is the only solution that you have to keep making profits. You got to be able to raise your prices. Cash flow and balance sheet management. As a business owner, this is very important. Cash is king. It is particularly king during the period of inflation, and more so even during a period of recession. So you've got to pay close attention to your balance sheet. You got to manage your balance sheet like you probably never have during a period of inflation. And then, as I said earlier, plan for the upcoming recession. So hopefully it doesn't come, but if this is like other periods in our economic history, it's likely to come if inflation continues to increase at the rate it is increasing. And finally, we talk about BIPOC consumers. They've got to buy better also. I think they've got to increase the number of sources of income. You know, this is the time to work more, to look at other sources, to get a part-time job, quite frankly, for some. And you got to, I think it's a time to really cut debt. Debt is a killer during an inflationary period, and it's more so during a recession. So I think now is the time to take those steps. And so with that, I'm a little over 12 o'clock. I'm a little over 1 o'clock, but I have some time for Q&A. I hope, Q.
Absolutely you do. Absolutely you do. I know that there are some juicy questions out there, where I hope that our attendees will start submitting them in the text box, because our good man Alex is always the one managing the questions to be submitted to the floor. I have 25 myself, but the floor is open for our wonderful attendees. Thank you so very much. That was meaty, but very fluid. Thank you so very much for making it understandable for a layman like myself, Captain.
Thank you.
So we actually have our first question already, thanks to David Deaton. He's asking, how long do you expect this inflationary period to go on for? So I guess he's asked a little bit of a crystal ball question there.
Right. And I'm going to go back to, if I can, that chart here. You guys see that? So you see in almost every one of those cases, inflation started and it started to rise, and it took in some cases, it happened over several years, the period of increases in prices, before it finally was broken by a recession. And I think that tells you something, is that we would hope that and every economic cycle is different, but and I don't know. I mean, I'll be the first to say I don't know how long this period of inflation is going to last. There are a lot of unique things that are taking place that have never happened before. We've never had in this period that you're looking at a period of a pandemic combined with a war in Europe, and the types of actions taken against the Russian economy that are having particular effects on gas markets and oil markets. So this is unique that we're a period that we're going through. I don't know, but I think that the prudent thing to do for a business owner is to plan for a period of prices in the 6.5%, 7.5%, 8% range, probably for the next few months, and followed by perhaps a slowdown in economic growth. And so it's going to be an interesting time over the next couple of years.
So Lisa, I see your hand is raised. So I think we got a question from Lisa here.
Yep. As a business owner and evaluating where and how you move forward in this particular market, what would help you determine when and how you should take on new debt as a business owner? Should you consider taking on new ventures that could grow your business, or where it's a lot of uncertainty? It might help you grow your business, but there's a lot of uncertainty. Would you suggest just sitting back and waiting until we are possibly over a full recession, or just to see, what is the true benefits and whether or not it's going to help us grow customers and where we can diversify? Because a lot of times in an inflationary market, you want to diversify your investments. So if you're considering a new investment, what would be some of the criteria you would want to cross off as to, yeah, this can justify us taking this particular step?
Great question. I think one of the factors that would have to go into my calculation about as a new investment for a business, i.e. taking on buying another company or expanding your product line or expanding your market into a new geographic market, is one, am I going to get the continued capital support that I need to make this thing work? Again, if you have, what happens during recessions, and this is sort of the riskiness of it. What happens during recessions is, say you have a line of credit with a bank, and I don't know if there are any bankers on the call, but if you have a line of credit with the bank might decide, I don't want to extend this line. I want to be, I want the money back. How would that affect your plans if all of a sudden you lost access to your source of financing that you had counted on because you thought it was a good deal? And so, I think you gotta be looking at securing your now is a very good time as a business owner to go talk to your bank. And after of course, you've developed your strategy, so you can have that strategic conversation with them and say, hey, look, I know this is a different sort of environment, but I want you to know what I'm doing to grow my business or to sustain my business during this period. And I want your support to execute these plans. So I think here's a time you got to line up your relationships with your bank, your relationships with your customers. And if you're going to be looking at an acquisition right now, it might be, you might find yourself in an acquisition environment paying more right now than you would during a recessionary environment. So it's one of those things that the ironies, a lot, people lose money during recessions, but people also make money during recessions. And they make money during recessions often by buying distressed assets, including distressed businesses. But the people who and companies that can buy distressed businesses have a line of capital and have survived themselves and have managed their resources well.
I agree. Great question, as Lisa. Really, that was helpful for me too. Ayani asks, how will increased usage of AI impact the labor market and minority business enterprises?
Wow. Well, I think that's a productivity issue. I mean, if you think about AI, artificial intelligence, it's intelligence, but it's not human intelligence. It's human intelligence created it, but it's something you don't have to pay a wage for. And so it's replacing labor that AI is doing. And so the reason why it's being pursued is to increase productivity. And so I think that if your competitors are using AI in ways that increase their productivity, make them more competitive, and you're not using this technology and it's become the standard in your industry, you're going to find yourself at a competitive disadvantage in some markets. And so that's where I think if you are a business, you've got to look at all of the avenues towards increasing productivity, because it's increasing in productivity that's going to make you more productive, but also make you more competitive and ultimately make you more profitable.
Absolutely. And I got more coming in here. You got Yolanda asked us, if a person, so obviously one of the things you mentioned, Dr. McKinney, is you can raise prices if need be when in an inflationary environment like this. So Yolanda asked, if a person chooses to raise prices in reaction to inflation, what are the warning signs for a business to let them know, okay, it's time for me to reduce my prices again, or I've gone a little too far, I've raised beyond where I can?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think here's where you've got to have your pulse on your consumers, your customers. And I've been following the pricing behavior of a number of companies in the U.S. economy and how they're going about doing it and how they're communicating these price increases with their customers, because none of your customers want to hear that you're going to raise their prices. But the only good thing that's happening now is that everybody knows that we're experiencing inflation. It's not going to be a surprise when you tell your customer, hey, look, but you got to be able to explain it to them that, my costs, whatever it is that goes into your costs, have increased, and you can show them that. And you got to increase your prices to continue to provide the services that you are and the quality that you're providing them. And so that is a conversation that you have to have with your customers. Now, if your customers feel like your competition is not raising prices, they may go out and test the waters. Now, you don't want them to test the waters. That's why you might want to provide them as much information as possible. You might want to say, well, it's not just me. I've looked at my competitors. I know they've raised prices by this and they've raised prices by that. And so, you want to discourage. This is where, your communication strategy is very important. And you might want to say, look, when things settle down, we'll go back or we'll reduce. But it's very difficult to raise prices, even in an inflationary environment, because you always have the threat of losing your client to your competition. So, but you want to have that relationship with your client, so that they'll understand why you're doing it, and that you want to keep them as a client. And you might want to say, okay, well, look, we'll do something else on some other product that's not increasing. And so, if you can identify some products that are really affected by inflation, but you might have some others that are not, then you say it's not across the board. It's just with this product, not that product. So that's where your analysis comes in, is to really understand what's driving your cost.
Yolanda, does that answer your question? Did you have a slight clarification?
Yeah, just a slight clarification, Dr. McKinney. Thank you for your response. And it is probably just the way I wrote the question. Part of what I was asking in terms of the warning signs, there's these, warning signs that say, now is an opportunity to raise prices in order to make sure your businesses, stays competitive, but also that it stays in the black. What are the things that we should be looking for that tells us that the economy is starting to change and trend towards either balancing itself out or going into a recessionary state, so that you can adjust accordingly, so that you don't get caught out there, if you did choose to raise your prices to so that you can kind of stay ahead of the curve, and know what you should be watching for to know when to make that change again.
Well, I think the signs are you want to pay very close attention to economic activity. A lot of it is sort of national or global economic activity, but more if you're selling in a local market, you want to pay much more attention to what's going on in that local market, as an indicator of where companies and consumers and your competitors are. But it's a tricky balancing act. And I mean, you've got the pressure of staying in business, staying profitable, staying competitive. You like the people that you perhaps work with. You want to keep them on if you can. So you got a bunch of different forces that are competing with each other. And it's kind of, it's not easy. But I will tell you that you have to get closer to your customer. Your customer knows things that you may not know. Your customer may know what other folks are doing because they're out there shopping themselves. So you need to be really close to your customer during a period of inflation and particularly during a period of recession, because if we go into a recession, prices will fall. And you see the pattern here. Every time we go into a recession, prices come down. And so, that's a conversation that you might also have with your clients. He says, hey, look, if we hope that this is temporary, this is a temporary price increase. And you might even come up with something clever, like we're gonna tie our price increase to the consumer price index. And if the consumer price index goes down next month, guess what? We're going to give you a price break. So it's communicating with your customer to let them know that you're not just trying to stick it to them right now because everybody else is, that you want to keep and grow their business.
Great point. Say, Yanni, Stacey, I'm going to get to you shortly. I'm just going to, Ty Cooper, a little earlier, he made a great point. He said, isn't it always fiscally responsible for a business owner to make more money, be more productive, diversify risks, increase your prices by what the market can bear, and not take excessive debt? So I guess he goes somewhat back to your point, Dr. McKinney, that in recession, in tough environments like this, we're encouraged to do things that are better for our business long term anyway. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, I managing, that's what goes back to that bullet on managing your balance sheet. You have to, a lot of times, if during the good times, when things are relatively easier, you don't have to pay as close attention. You don't have to manage as hard. You can be successful without, the drive that you might need during a stressful time. But yeah, managing your debt, managing your employees, increasing your connections to your existing clients, understanding the competition better, honing your strategy. I mean, strategy is really important. I'll give you an example. I mean, and it's a what if. I'm not saying that this is something that anybody can do, but what if you had a great relationship with your bank? And you went to your bank and said, hey, look, this is my strategy. My competition is going to raise prices. I already know it. They're already raising prices. I've already seen it. I'm not going to raise prices, but I want you to help me out here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my prices at a certain level, and I'm going to go after their customers. And I'm going to try to take their business. But I need your help to finance this episode. And I will need it for a period of time. You've done the calculations. You can't go to them and ask them to make the calculations for you. You've done the calculations. You can say, look, I'm gonna take a little pain here in my bottom line, but I need to know you're gonna be there for me to get me through the next 6 to 12 months. And if you do that, I'm gonna come out of this with a bigger company, a more profitable company, fewer competitors, a better market share, and an ability at some point in the future to raise prices to get back to where I need to be. I mean, that's strategy. That is thinking, not just reacting. So you want to, now is a really good time to, and I'm not saying that's your strategy that you should take, but that is an example of a strategic approach to an uncertain and inflationary environment.
Yanni, did you have another question?
Yes, so I previously heard when you mentioned that used car markets and real estate markets have the upper hand. So in your opinion, what industries do you think will have the upper hand in the upcoming recession?
Well, if you think about a recession, one of the things that people or consumers don't do as much of is they don't do as much discretionary spending, right? So they are managing their own budgets. And so if they have been used to spending a certain amount of money on vacations, then they may do less of it. But what do they continue to do? They continue to do the things that they need to do. The market for necessities continues to grow during periods of recession. Economists have a term for those types of products. I mean, they're necessities more or less. So if you're in that market where consumers need what you have, regardless of the economic times, then you may be less affected by a recession than if you're selling something that is purely discretionary. For example, if you're selling art, and I love art, but during a recession, the art market's not going to be the same as it was during an expansion when people have money. So I think that's what you want to pay attention to, is what are consumers buying and what are they not buying during a recessionary period.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And Lisa, did you have another question as well?
Not really a question, but a comment that I do agree, and that as businesses, you really need to be able to justify any price increase that you present to your consumers, that your customers, because otherwise they feel that you are just piling on to what they already see as price gouging. You need to be able to justify why you are raising your prices. And that if they are able to understand why you are raising your prices, then that creates loyalty to your brand. Otherwise, they don't trust you and they leave. Mm-hmm. And if you are not just understanding what is happening at the executive level, but also at the consumer level, I always believe that you're going to win if you are listening to your client base, people who are buying your products. If you're listening at that level, you're always going to win, because sometimes market analysis just show a very broad perspective, and it does not get down to that granular level where you understand your client base. Mm-hmm. And if you can understand your client base and the influencers that are buying your products, you're always going to win. So we can always hear about, I mean, if you go to the Wall Street Journal and you can hear this very broad perspective about what's happening to the market. If you don't have a consensus or an understanding of what's happening at the lower, and I don't mean it disrespectful, but to the lower level of your consumers who are actually buying your products, you're gonna lose. You really are. You need to understand how they are seeing your products and whether or not you are trustworthy and how you manage your price increases, or whether or not, oh, this company is just price gouging and they're just piling on to what they see other companies are doing. If you are able to justify why your prices are increasing, you're going to create loyal clientele. And that is so important. When I got into the real estate industry, the market crashed. I was going through the Great Recession. So I needed to adapt myself and reevaluate how I was going to do my business. So I thought that if I could understand the people who were still buying in that market, then I could be successful in how I move forward with my business. So I think the same way. We have inflation. Why are people still buying products during an inflationary period? They get less value, right? They get less value for the money, but why are they still buying? A lot of times it's because of loyalty, because they can trust what you are saying to them, and there is value in what you're saying. So if your consumer can trust that you're just not price gouging and you're just not adding on to what other companies are doing to just get the most profit, instead of, okay, hey, we need to pay our employees, we need to make sure that we are profitable in our business, just regular business justifications as to why we continue to raise our prices, then people will hold on to you. People will be loyal to you. But if it appears as if, oh, they have no reason, no justification as to why they are raising prices, then why should I be loyal to them? Because I feel that they're price gouging me. So be able to justify why you have the price increases, and people will be loyal to you. And when the Great Recession happened, I was able to see that because I was able to justify why I was able to increase prices or hold on to the clients that I was able to hold on to. So I would like for you to reiterate the fact that people need to have clear expectations of why you are increasing your prices and the value of that in the marketplace during an inflationary market. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I think everything you said is spot on. You're talking in an inflationary period about keeping your customers and being sensitive to their own needs. And you might, again, in talking to your customers, you might learn that there's some things that you can do that don't cost you a lot, but may be valuable to them, and to that in some respects offsets the price increase that you're giving them, or you're asking them to pay. But yes, you've got to be able to explain it to them and not just write it off as, well, all prices are rising, so I'm raising my price. That's not a good approach. You will lose customers if that's what you're saying to them. So, you want to have this as this is a conversation, an educational conversation you're having with your customers. And it's also, you want to let your customers know that you're taking steps, that the steps that you're taking to mitigate those cost increases. You are pursuing increases in productivity. Be specific. What are those things that you're doing to lower your cost? so that you are going to be able to limit these price increases. Because another thing that customers don't like, and I've seen this in some of the coverage of businesses' response to the current inflation, is they've raised their prices 3 or 4 times in the last 6 months. That's not good, right? I mean, they don't want to hear from you every other month saying you got to increase I got to increase my price by another 2 or 3%. So, here again, you've got a strategic decision to make, and you could be wrong. Just because it's strategic doesn't mean it's going to be right. You could be wrong. I mean, you could say, okay, I think I need to increase. If I increase prices by 4%, then I think that's all I got to do. And I'm going to keep it at that. And you can tell people, you got to be careful what you tell them, because if you tell them you're going to do something, you got to do it. Otherwise, you will sort of burn some bridges. But, you have to make some educated guesses here on what's necessary to maintain profitability and to also keep your customers. But communication with your customers about what it is you're doing and why you're doing it is very important during an inflationary period. It also demonstrates to your customers that you're thinking like a business person. They're making the same decisions, and you can ask them, well, what, if you're in the B2B space, you can ask your customers, well, what are you doing? You're not the only supplier that they have. And they've got customers. So what are they doing? And so getting them to talk about it might make it more easier for them to understand your position. Okay,
Absolutely.
so that's where the conversation is.
Absolutely. And thanks, everyone. We got, before we end, I would have no more questions here, or just one more comment from Ty Cooper. He's been waiting patiently to add a perspective on his comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here, man. I really appreciate your perspective on this, and your knowledge base is really important for people to know this. Earlier, I stated that some of the practical things that we do as business owners, and who we try to be successful at what we do. For me, I think it may be possible a little bit different from different business sectors. I know within my business, is very competitive, but we also have a lot of loyalty. So for instance, if someone comes to me to create their branding video or television commercial or what have you, they come to me over and over and over again because they appreciate the work. But they also know if they pay $5,000 in 2019 for a branding video, they know they're not paying $5,000 for that same branding video in 2022. There's expected increases. And I haven't had a problem with that, So every year I do increase my pricing because equipment costs more money. There's a lot of things that cost more money, and we have to put that into the pricing structure. At least I do. Maybe it's different for someone else. And I have not come across in the past 10 years of me being in business and going up every year, I haven't come across a situation where I have to explain that to a client, particularly a returning client. New clients, they wouldn't know the pricing. It's not an increase to them. But for me, it's definitely an increase. And I would say, honestly speaking, within the past 8 years, I probably went up on certain services. I went up about 100% by now. We're talking about 8 years later. So it's just what it is. But I also own a dry cleaning service, and those prices go up every year as well. And I never had to explain it with anyone. So, but I do believe what Lisa said. I agree with Lisa wholeheartedly that you should listen to your client base. You should definitely know what's happening. But with me, with inflation, in like 2 weeks, because I balance my own personal finances that way. I decide what's important. If I want to get a haircut and spend $20, I'm gonna get it. But if I want to save it, I'm gonna save it. I got rid of my Amazon Prime monthly. I do what I have to do to be responsible. So I do understand how you can maneuver around inflation as a consumer, but as a business, me owning a business and understanding that consumer behavior, I'm gonna still increase my pricing, but I'm also try to be as strategic as possible with my investments. I just moved money around a few weeks ago to maximize my ROI on my money. So it's what we have to do is just being responsible humans and also business people.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And my apologies, we did have one question that came in from Brian Thomas before I had closed off the Q&A. So Brian, I know you had some a point on the banking relationship and just the importance of reaching out.
Yeah, I really didn't have a question. I was just saying, because I think the real key for all business owners, no matter if we're just in this period of time or forever, is to have that open discussion with your banker, because surprises are not your best friend in the banking world. And having a candid discussion with your banker just to let you know what's going on, whether it be on an interim basis, a quarterly basis, or something like that. Have that open discussion. That's real key. It's what I would just suggest. Okay.
Thank you.
Alex,
Thank you.
I would just like to add really quickly is, you know, when we're dealing in an inflationary market and everything is increasing, from the cars that you own to the housing that you're trying to get into, as long as you are legitimately able to justify why you are able to increase the pricing, then people understand that. And I think that we need to truly understand that. If you are able to truly justify why your pricing is increasing and the impact from you being in the business, oh, okay, this industry passed on their price increase to me, so I need to pass it on to you. It's not that I want to do it, but it is how the market is, and it is how inflation is. And if you are as honest as possible to your clientele, then you will have loyal clientele, but it is all tied back to you communicating to your clientele. So I think that that is so vital in what all that we do.
Thank you so very much.
Especially with Ty. I just thought about what.
Lisa, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, no, but we're trying to wrap it up. No,
Oh, I
okay?
understand.
Yeah, but I really, I think your point resonates very well with us all. I really, truly wish that we could do this for another hour, because like I said, Dr. Fred, before we opened it up, I had 27 questions. Now I got 32. But this was fantastic. I mean, really, this was a fantastic session. I really and truly hope that each and every one of you here has gotten some value from this. Please know, if you could put Dr. Fred's website in the chat box. Anyone who wants to reach out to Dr. Fred, please feel free. You all know that he's a vast amount of information, and with a great perspective, a historical perspective and a today perspective for entrepreneurs. There's so many points I wanted to share about that stood out to me on this, but one for consumers, not even the minority business community, but for consumers, is buying better. And one of those things would be that came to my mind was pooling resources. Like some of our friends, we share memberships for video streaming services, but finding ways to pool resources to buy better in an inflationary period, I think would be a good idea. And talking to the bankers. So I'm glad Brian Thomas was here. I'm glad he shared this point, because this is very important for our minority business community. And the excuse me, some of the information that we've been pushing to the MBA about balance sheet analysis, financial statement analysis. These things are important, and I'm loving how they're tying together. So without any further ado, we thank you all for sticking with us until 1:39. We've gone over our time. We appreciate you all sharing your time with us. But if there's not any other thing, I think I've seen some comments. Nonetheless, we're gonna leave. Let us leave the Zoom open for a few more minutes as we bid farewell to everyone, Andrea, so that people can get the information that they need. But we would like to close out now and thank you all so very much. Thank you, Mark Cartwright, for the connection, for your attendance. We're glad you're in this community. That is our new supplier diversity guy at UVA. We're looking forward to developing our relationships in the minority business community with UVA procurement. And just know, Mark, that we are going to be raising our prices.
Thanks for letting me know.